My dad called the cops on me for wrecking his $80,000 Camaro. He froze when the officer played the dashcam footage. For 23 years of my life, my dad had two sons, me, and a 2023 Camaro ZL1 in rapid blue that he paid $80,000 cash for. I am not even joking. That car had its own spot in the garage, its own cover, its own ceramic coating schedule. I wasn't allowed to park my old Civic within 2 feet of it. If my jacket zipper brushed it, he would lose his mind. It wasn't always like this. When I was 12, we had a beat-up 78 Chevelle on blocks in that same garage. Every Saturday, me and him, covered in grease, trying to get it to start. He would let me hold the flashlight and he would say, "One day, kid, you and me are gonna build something nobody can touch." My mom left a year later. She told me on the way to the airport, "Your father loves things that don't talk back." He missed my high school graduation because he was at a car auction in Ohio. He said he forgot. My mom cried in the parking lot. When he retired early from the union, he bought the Camaro. He looked at me and said, "This is the one, Brandon. You and me, we're gonna do it right this time." We never did. He never let me drive it. Not once. I moved back home for 6 months after college to save for an apartment. I paid $400 rent to sleep in the basement. I bought my own groceries. I tried to be invisible. Last Tuesday, Linda knocked on my basement door. Linda is my dad's wife of 3 years, a quiet woman who spent most of her time trying to keep the peace in a house that always felt like it was about to catch fire. She stood on the bottom step holding a basket of laundry, her face tight, and asked, "Brandon, honey, your dad's back is out. So could you please wash the Camaro for him? He wants it clean for cars and coffee tomorrow morning. And he told me to come down here and ask you." I looked up from my laptop, already feeling my stomach tie itself into a familiar knot, and answered, "Linda, I really don't think I should touch that car." She glanced nervously up the wooden stairs toward the kitchen, lowered her voice to a whisper, and pleaded, "Please, Brandon." He insisted, and you know how he gets if it isn't ready. So I washed it. I went outside and treated that machine like it was made of thin glass. I used his strict 2-bucket method, measured out his $30 specialty soap, and unlocked the cabinet where he kept his clean microfiber towels. I was so paranoid about him blaming me for a swirl mark that I propped my phone on a patio chair and filmed myself doing the entire wash. The timestamp on my recording read exactly 3:17 p.m. In that video, as I wiped down the passenger side, the rear quarter panel is completely flawless. Not a single dent, scratch, or ripple in the blue paint. When I finished drying it, I got in, started the engine, and moved it 10 feet forward down the driveway so the afternoon sun would dry the wheels. I put it in park, locked the doors, and hung the key fob right back on its designated brass hook in the kitchen. At exactly 6:03 p.m., the heavy rumble of my dad's F-150 pulled into the driveway way too fast. 2 minutes later, I heard the boots stomping across the kitchen floor directly above my head. You know that specific kind of stomping where someone is already boiling with anger and looking for a target to unload it on. The basement door flew open, and his voice echoed down the concrete stairwell, yelling, "Brandon, get your ass up here right now." I walked up the stairs and followed him out to the driveway. The passenger rear quarter panel of the Camaro was completely caved in. There was a deep, jagged scrape running across the body line. The rapid blue paint was scraped away to the bare metal, and the black lower trim was cracked in half. It looked like someone had backed it hard into a concrete parking pillar. My dad was standing over it, his hands shaking with rage, pointing at the dent as he screamed, "What the hell did you do to my car?" I held my hands up, stepping back, and said, "Dad, I didn't touch anything after I washed it. I swear to you. I have a video on my phone from 3:17 showing the car in the sun, and there is zero damage." He waved his hand in my face, his face turning bright red as he shouted, "Don't you lie to me in my own yard. You are just like your mother, walking away from every mistake with zero responsibility." That was his favorite script. For weeks he had been complaining to Linda at the dinner table that I was drifting through life without purpose, and that what I really needed was a hard lesson in consequences. He didn't even give me a chance to pull out my phone. He reached into his pocket, dialed the police non-emergency line, and shifted his voice instantly into the calm, reasonable, deeply disappointed tone of a concerned parent, saying into the receiver, "Yes, good evening. My adult son took my vehicle without permission and destroyed an $80,000 car, and now he is refusing to take responsibility for it. I need an officer dispatched to my home to file a formal report for my insurance company." Linda walked out onto the front porch, heard what he was saying, and grabbed his forearm, whispering desperately, "Frank, don't do this. Just stop and talk to him." He yanked his arm away from her without even looking back. 20 minutes later, a county cruiser pulled up to the curb. Officer Davis stepped out. He was an older guy with graying hair and tired eyes, looking like a man who had already dealt with 5 domestic noise complaints that shift and had zero interest in refereeing a family argument over a fender bender. My dad immediately stepped forward to greet him, putting on his solemn performance as he shook the officer's hand and explained, "Officer, thank you for coming out. My adult son lives downstairs in my basement. I allowed him to wash my ZL1 this afternoon, and he backed it into something while moving it. Now he refuses to give me his insurance information to cover the bodywork." Officer Davis flipped open a small leather notebook, looked at me with a tired, judgmental glance that told me he saw me as just another reckless kid trying to avoid paying for daddy's toys, and asked, "Son, did you strike the vehicle while you were operating it?" I looked the officer straight in the eye and answered, "No, sir. I washed it, moved it 10 feet forward into the sun, and put the keys away. I took a video of the car at 3:17 p.m., and it was completely undamaged." My dad let out a loud, mocking scoff, crossing his arms and saying to the cop, "He always has a convenient excuse for everything he breaks." Officer Davis sighed, clicking his pen with a loud snap, clearly preparing to tell us that this was a civil matter between family members and that we needed to work it out without involving the department. That is what real, experienced cops do when nobody is injured and the stories don't match. But my dad couldn't just let it go. His stubborn pride needed a total, crushing victory in front of an audience. He pointed up toward the windshield of the Camaro and said to the officer with absolute confidence, "Officer, this vehicle is equipped with a Sentry Mode system. It records 24/7 high-definition video from every angle whenever motion is detected. It will show you exactly what he did to my car. Chase, go inside and grab my laptop right now." Chase, Linda's 17-year-old son who usually spent dinner smirking at whatever insults my dad threw my way, didn't smile this time. He looked between me and my dad with an uncomfortable, nervous expression, then turned and ran inside to fetch the computer. When he brought it out, we all gathered in a tight, silent circle on the concrete driveway. That 15-inch screen suddenly became the entire courtroom. Chase plugged in the memory card and clicked on the first recorded file at 3:17 p.m. The footage played in sharp, clear digital video. There I was, washing the wheels, drying the roof with a microfiber towel, getting inside, and backing it up exactly 10 feet into the sunlight. As I walked away from the vehicle, the camera captured the passenger quarter panel in full sunlight. The metal was smooth, clean, and completely undamaged. Silence fell over the driveway. Nobody said a word. Chase fast-forwarded through the next timeline file, spanning from 3:18 p.m. all the way to 6:02 p.m. For almost 3 hours, the driveway was completely still. The Camaro sat motionless in the afternoon sun. Nobody walked past it. Not a single car pulled into the yard. Nothing touched the paint. My dad shifted his weight, his breathing growing heavier and louder in the quiet afternoon air. Officer Davis leaned down closer to the screen, pointed his finger at the trackpad, and instructed, "Play that next file. The one at 6:03. Chase clicked the file. We all leaned in so close we could hear the laptop cooling fan spinning up. On the screen, the driveway is empty. Then, the audio track picks up the loud, aggressive roar of my dad's F-150 turning off the street and pulling into the yard way too fast. Through the truck's open window, you can hear my dad arguing loudly on his Bluetooth speakerphone about a delayed union pension payout, his voice stressed and distracted. He isn't looking at his mirrors. He swings the heavy truck wide, cutting the corner as he pulls into his usual parking spot right next to the Camaro. His heavy steel rear tow hitch swings out and slams directly into the Camaro's passenger quarter panel. Crunch. The impact is so loud and violent that the microphone on the Camaro's dashcam crackles and distorts. On the video, the F-150 brakes hard. The driver's door opens, and my dad steps out onto the pavement. He walks around to the back of his truck, stops, and stares down at the caved-in rapid blue metal he just destroyed with his own hands. For 5 seconds, he doesn't move a muscle. Then, he looks nervously up and down the empty street to see if any of the neighbors saw him fail. He turns around, kicks his own rear truck tire as hard as he can in silent, boiling rage, and gets right back into the driver's seat. He puts the truck in drive, inches forward 3 feet to hide the gap between the vehicles, turns off the ignition, and walks into the front door of the house without looking back. 40 seconds of video. That was the entire truth. When the clip ended, the screen went black. Nobody moved. The only sound left in the yard was the evening birds in the trees and the hum of the computer processor. Linda didn't shout at him. She didn't cause a scene. She just turned her head slowly, looked at the man she had been married to for 3 years, and said in a voice so quiet it was barely a whisper, "Frank, tell him." My dad froze completely. The angry red color drained out of his face, leaving him dead white. His mouth hung open slightly, his jaw tight, his eyes locked onto his own reflected hands on the dark computer screen. He was completely cornered by his own pride, and for the first time in my life, he didn't have a script to read from. Officer Davis slowly turned his head, looked at my dad with a cold, hard stare, and asked, "Mr. Frank, that is you on the recorded footage at 6:03 p.m. striking your own unattended vehicle, correct? The exact same vehicle you just called my dispatcher to report your son for wrecking." My dad stared at the asphalt and said nothing. Chase quietly closed the laptop lid, looked over at me with sad eyes, mouthed the word sorry without making a sound, and walked back inside the house. Officer Davis tucked his leather notebook back into his chest pocket, looked at me with a soft, respectful nod, and said, "Son, you're free to go back inside. You didn't do anything wrong here, and there is no crime for me to investigate." Then the officer turned back to my dad, stepping half a pace closer, and warned him in a sharp, professional tone, "Sir, if you submit an insurance claim stating that another driver caused this damage, this video recording makes that action a federal insurance fraud violation and filing a false police report. I strongly suggest you pay a body shop out of your own pocket." He turned around, walked down the driveway, got into his marked cruiser, and drove away, leaving the two of us standing 10 feet apart in the quiet yard. I didn't say a single word to him. I walked down the basement stairs, pulled my canvas duffel bag out of the closet, and packed every piece of clothing I owned in 15 minutes. I carried my bag upstairs, walked through the kitchen, and set my brass basement key down on the marble island. When I walked out to the driveway and loaded my bag into the trunk of my old Civic, my dad was still inside the garage. He was sitting in the driver's seat of that wrecked Camaro in the dark, his hands gripping the leather wheel, his forehead resting heavily against the top of the steering column. He didn't look up when I started my engine, and he didn't step out when I backed down the driveway and pulled away from his house for the last time. I rented a tiny, one-room studio apartment 3 miles away in a dated brick building near the train tracks. It was small and cheap. It had one narrow window looking out at a brick alley, one old coffee mug that I washed in the bathroom sink, and one little potted pothose plant on the windowsill that I kept forgetting to water but somehow refused to die. It was basic, but it was mine. The first morning I woke up on my thin mattress on the floor, I lay there in the gray morning light listening to the silence. There were no heavy boots stomping across the ceiling above me. There was nobody slamming kitchen cabinets or looking for an excuse to shout. There were no invisible lines I had to avoid crossing. I made a cup of black coffee, sat down with my back against the bare plaster wall, and quietly cried into my knees. Not because I was heartbroken, but because for the first time in 23 years, my home was completely quiet, and I realized I had survived. 6 months later, last Saturday morning, the spring sun was shining down on the shopping center parking lot for the monthly cars and coffee meet. There were hundreds of polished sports cars, muscle builds, and imports lined up in the rows, gleaming under the clear morning sky. I had walked over from my apartment to the corner cafe and was walking back down the sidewalk carrying 2 hot cardboard cups of coffee, one for me and one for my friend Marcus, who was waiting back at my studio to help me assemble a small kitchen table I had bought secondhand. As I walked past the main display row, my eyes caught a flash of rapid blue paint. It was the Camaro. It was parked in the premier corner spot, shining brilliantly in the sun. I looked at the passenger rear quarter panel. The bodywork had been repaired professionally. The metal was straight and smooth, the black lower trim was brand new, and the paint reflected the morning clouds without a single flaw or ripple. It looked like it had never been touched by a tow hitch in its life. My dad was standing next to the rear fender, holding a clean microfiber towel, buffing the paint in slow, familiar, circular motions. It was the exact same scene from 11 years ago when I was 12 years old, carrying 2 cups of hot coffee out to the garage while he worked on the Chevelle on blocks. Only back then, he never bothered to look over his shoulder or turn around when I walked up. This time, he stopped buffing. He turned his head and saw me walking down the sidewalk holding the 2 cups. I slowed my pace just a fraction of a second, stopping 10 feet away from his car on the asphalt. For a split second, looking at him standing there in his clean jacket, I thought he was going to look down at his rag and pretend he didn't recognize me, exactly the way he had done his entire life, whenever something felt uncomfortable. Instead, his hands dropped to his sides. I watched his throat work as he swallowed hard. 30 years of stubborn pride and need for control, trying desperately to move out of the way for just 1 second. He looked at me, his voice rough and quiet over the sound of the crowd, and said, "Brandon." I didn't step closer. I just looked at him. He looked down at the microfiber towel in his hands, then looked back up into my eyes, and said, "I watched you drive away that night. I wanted to call you. I just didn't know how." There was no grand movie apology. He didn't tell me he was sorry for treating a piece of metal better than his own flesh and blood. He didn't ask me to come back for dinner, and he didn't beg for my forgiveness. It was just one awkward, broken, honest sentence from a man who had spent his entire life building walls out of possessions because he was terrified of connecting with human beings. I looked at his aging face in the morning light. There was no boiling anger left in my chest anymore. There were no tears waiting to fall, and there was no desperate need for him to finally tell me I was good enough. I just nodded my head slowly, finally seeing him clearly for exactly who and what he was. I kept walking. I didn't stop. The Camaro still shines. We don't.